Welcome to Journeying Faithfully, our podcast about faith, discipleship, and everything in between, where this series we're discussing health and the church. I am Reverend Josh, I'm Vicar of Norbury Church, and my co-host with me today is...
Ashley. I am a training vicar and have other various roles, but I've been interested in health and faith for a long time.
What are we up to this podcast, Ashley?
It's really exciting, this podcast. We actually have two guests on this evening. We have Vanessa and Mark. I'll let them explain a little bit more about who they are. But yeah, it's really exciting.
Wonderful. Shall we dive into this episode, which has so much wisdom and wealth of knowledge from these two wonderful people, two people we get to call friends and journey with, but who have so much experience and far more knowledge than we do. Shall we dive in?
Definitely. People are going to learn a lot. I certainly did.
Vanessa and Mark, it's lovely to have you with us this evening on our podcast, Journeying Faithfully. I wonder if, in a few words, you could just introduce yourself to those who maybe in our audience haven't heard of you, that they could just to get to know briefly where you are, what your role is, and a bit about yourself, really. So, Vanessa, do you want to go first?
Yeah, sure. Thank you very much, Joshua. It's really, and Ashley, it's really lovely that you've invited me along. I'm really looking forward to it, to speaking with you this evening, having this conversation. So you can probably see from the screen that I'm the inclusion officer for the Diocese of Chester. I didn't start out in that role. I actually started out as the engagement and inclusion officer for families and disabilities. So it's kind of evolved really into the inclusion officer's role. So as the disability advisor for the diocese for years. So yeah, we really love it, actually, love working with people and in support of other people. Things, race and ethnicity, dementia, mental health and disability, and I'm working on the Living Love and Faith conversation as well at the moment for the diocese. I'm also a curate. I'm a curate at St Mary's Church in Nantwich, and I'm still a registered social worker by profession.
Wow, I'd love to have, it's not tonight's conversation, but I'd love to have a conversation about how you manage to juggle all those roles, because I'm sure you have family and friends as well that you spend time with. So I'd love to have a conversation about how you juggle all that, because I definitely sometimes struggle. Struggling.
I think it's called spinning plates.
Mark, would you introduce yourself as well, please?
So my name's Mark Turner. I am I'm a chaplain, a school chaplain. But I also serve an altar in Eastham and the people of Eastham. That's where I am a self-supporting minister. I have to think what that is sometimes. I'm a member of Chester Diocese Disability Forum, where a group of us meet together to talk over some of the issues presented within the diocese in terms of disability. So, but I come here today just as me. And offer my humble opinion and views.
Thank you both. Well, this series in our podcast, we've been looking at health and discipleship and looking about how health can impact our faith and what we can learn from habits of health and how that can intersect with our faith journey. And we're really interested tonight about having a conversation around disability and faith. As many of you know, I'm the vicar of Norbury, and one of my first Sundays here, a member of the congregation came to me at the end of the service and said, I'm just not quite sure if I fit here because of who I am. And when we unpacked that, a lot of that was to do with them just not feeling the same as everyone else and some of that was to do with disability. And it made me start to think about the negative stories that we put on ourselves because, of our disability that we have. I mean, I can often put myself down because of my learning difficulties and think that I'm not quite as bright as everyone else. So really we want to have that conversation about linking disability, healing, faith all together, and just to debunk some of those myths and have a practical conversation about what our faith journeys look like in us. So the first question that I'm going to pose to us all, and actually please do chip in, is what is disability? How would we define disability?
Shall I go first?
Yeah.
Is that okay? Yeah. There is the Equality Act 2010 defines a person disabled if they have a mental or physical impairment which has both long-term and substantial negative implications for completing normal day-to-day tasks. But I think there are other definitions as well. We have the medical model, and the medical model defines disability as a damage to a person's body or mental functioning requiring a diagnosis, care and professional treatment. So that is like, well, the doctor has to kind of get involved and the trips to the hospital, and it comes under the being treated and diagnosis. The social model argues that the problem should not be located within the individual, but it's actually the disabling environment that excludes and denigrates often people with disabilities. So it's those three. So my own view is that it is society more so that disables people, because it's a form of social oppression, and that results from the environment unsuited to the needs of disabled people.
I think I was a pharmacist and I've been interested in health and disability for a long time, and I always really struggle with the medical one and how negative it can come across. And how someone reading that may actually feel. Yeah, absolutely. And we'll go on to talk about later on the theology that underpins that social model more than the medical model a bit later.
For me, that the medical model is in some respects needed, but not to be sort of lauded over. It's really that need to be diagnosed is important, and that's where it comes from. But my problem with that is that it's a doctor that decides if you're disabled or not, and it's not their body. As much as I adore doctors, and trust me, if any of my doctors are watching this, they know how much I love them for all that they do to me, but they do it to me, and they do it for me, but they do it to me sometimes, especially when I've been particularly poorly. They've not done it with me, and that's particularly hard to deal with, but it makes a person fit some kind of norm. Now, what if you don't? What if your symptoms, what if your condition, what if your body isn't the same as the person next to you? So there's a whole load of things that the medical model, and thankfully it was quickly thrown out, but it is important to kind of, I think it's important to mention it. I think so. Vanessa's really right to mention it because it is part of it. But from a disabled person's point of view, it's the least loved, but the one that happens the most. Yeah. The other thing that you mentioned there, Vanessa, was the social model, and that, I mean, that throws up so many things, doesn't it? Really, that it's not. It's society that puts us down. It's I'm going to mention it in a moment. It's also like the use of language as well. I think it's people's attitudes. So, for instance, I'm also dyslexic, Josh, and it kind of amazes me when I go and listen to people preach, when they use these fabulously long words. I have to take a moment just to think. And that's not to say that I'm, as I was once told by a teacher, you're thick. It's nothing to do with that. Actually, it was just take a moment extra, a half a beat to process that. Just bear with me. But preachers in church use those big long words, don't they? Or they'll give us these big books for text. These, our big liturgy books, thick, full of words, and I've got to find my place, and I should know what I'm doing. Oh, flipping heck! So those kind of barriers that we put in place, those uses of language, like for instance, I can't stand the word disabled toilet. What about accessible toilets? These small little things. So our use of language, and that's linked into the social model, how society puts us down. I totally agree with what Vanessa says there.
This is about empowerment and disempowerment. The disempowerment when we feel we go to the doctors and we're being done to, like Mark has said, and the empowerment of the social model that empowers other people to live as normal life as they should be able to. Yeah, I mean, when I went down to Lambeth Palace a few years ago to a disability conference with there were about 200 delegates in the room, and Professor John Swinton was speaking, and he's a renowned theologian, disability theologian, and his question to us each was, how can you make a diamond of disability provision in your diocese from a piece of charcoal? And he put us into 20 groups of 10, and we had to discuss this on our amongst us at the 10 on the table. And I was quite new at that point, and I said to those who I was sitting amongst, well, I'm really excited because I'm new to post, and I can't wait to create a diamond of disability provision for our diocese. And there was a lady next to me, a wheelchair user actually, who became very cross, and she said, "I'm sick to death of non-disabled people telling us how to make a diamond of disability provision." And she had made very big assumptions, because I have a hidden disability. I have a daughter that has a disability, and I'm, experienced social worker working with children with disabilities. And I said to her that but she had made assumptions, and we do. I mean, we all do it, don't we? All make assumptions about people from the sound of their voice, the car they drive, the size of their house, the colour of their skin. We just make assumptions all the time about people, and I think that's what was one of my first lessons at university. When I started my social work degree, we were given an A4 sheet of faces with people in different clothing, and then their occupations on another piece of paper, and we had to match the occupation with the person. And it was like, well, actually, this is your first lesson, social workers: never make assumptions about anybody. But we do.
That can be so hard, especially in churches when you're faced on a Sunday morning. Because even when someone comes to church, we don't know anything about them, and we can make so many assumptions just by looking at them. Actually, we think they can read, as you say, Mark, an order of service, and they understand the liturgy.
Yes, yeah.
Even on a normal Sunday, you can struggle with the liturgy if you don't understand Anglicanism. It starts in one place, and you need to have 14 different books, or you used to have 14 different books to juggle. We make all these assumptions. without the context.
Yeah, and this is particularly appropriate when we think about disability and healing. We'll come on to it a bit later, but I'll just sort of mention it briefly here because I think it's about us. We're talking about assumptions. So if somebody who has a disability goes to the altar for a laying on of hands or for prayer, the person who is on the other side offering the prayer will assume that they are going for healing because they have a disability.
Yeah.
Quite dangerous, actually.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
And you're right. I think hopefully we'll come on to that later when we think about healing. But it's those hidden disabilities that people make massive assumptions because we try and make people conform sometimes to our way of doing things. Now, if someone's got back-related issues and they just need to stand during the service, surely they should be allowed to do that. Rather than sit, stand. And we do like to do that. It's like a workout in church sometimes. You're up and down. But it's about taking people as they are and not what we assume that they're going to be. I mean, there's so many hidden disabilities. Autism. My son went to a church. We went to a church as a family. And he's autistic, or he's on the autistic spectrum. And he had a very particular way of approaching that situation. And because he didn't conform to that particular church's way of, he was asked several times to be quiet. He actually wasn't making a noise. I know what children, and he wasn't. And I'm not just saying that because I'm his dad. But he was made to try and conform. Even if I tried to explain it to the church warden several times, and he just would not get what was going on. So it's about kind of being aware and knowing that just because someone uses a blue badge doesn't mean that they necessarily have two wheels attached to them. So there you go.
I think it's really important, Mark. You talked about language earlier, and somebody came to me a couple of weeks ago, and I've been pondering it since then, because I think it's really clever. Often in church, we say, if you're able, please stand. And that's one example. But how about changing the word able to if you're comfortable? So actually, if you're comfortable, please stand. If you're comfortable, sit. It's about welcoming people where they're at, isn't it? And making them understand that it's about their comfort rather than their ability to do something.
Because I think when people are comfortable, I think that sort of makes them more aware of what they're there for. If you're more worried about, I hate going into church services and sitting at the front, right at the front, as a member of the congregation, because my worry is that I would have to get up and go. So I will spend the rest of that service stressing, which I don't need to. I don't even pay attention to the service because I'm more worried about making a fool of myself. What? How is that going to? Because I have to stand up and go to the toilet and come back. That's not making a fool, but you still put that pressure. And again, it goes back to the social model, doesn't it? Because it's the pressure that not only society puts on us to conform, but we put on ourselves to conform as well, because we don't want to be different. We don't want to stand out. We want to be kind of, the same as. And I'm not sure that that's if we're going to be really inclusive, if we want the church to be somewhere where everyone's welcome, those are the days gone by, and we need to move forward.
Yeah, and sadly, people often feel that they need to be given permission, don't they?
Yeah.
Yes, we can say if you feel comfortable, but those people with hidden disability or disabled people may not feel comfortable just to stay seated, perhaps, even though they would be they would be comfortable because they want to be this, everybody needs to be the same for some people, don't they? We all need to behave in the same way. And I think if they're given permission, we just want everybody to just be how you are, be who you are, and be, and we all should, let's affirm that's okay. Let's all make that affirmation. That's okay. It's okay. You're okay. I'm okay. I think there's a book about that, isn't there, or something years ago.
I think we've just a little bit ahead, but it's absolutely fine. But we've jumped a bit ahead of some of those takeaways that I'd love people to think about at the end of our podcast this evening. But I wonder if, to begin with, we could go back to looking at how the Bible talks about disability. And if there are passages that maybe come to your mind when you think about disability in the Bible.
Yeah. Well, I think that many people perceive the Bible as negative towards disabled people. And I think that only serves to kind of reinforce the feelings of exclusion from social activities, and that includes church, because what they read find in Scripture. I think that Deuteronomy, Deuteronomy 28, I think there's consequences for being disobedient in there. The Lord's going to strike you with boils and tumours and scabs, and he'll strike you with blindness and madness, and you're going to be exploited and oppressed. And then there's Leviticus, is right. Leviticus 21, I think it is. Where no one with any form of disability can approach the altar to offer sacrifice to God, and that includes any disabled priest, and that's because they supposedly they have a defect, and anything that goes to the altar has to be pure. And these are terrible. Exactly. These are terrible, aren't they? For Zechariah is another one. God appears to be holding leaders particularly accountable for the disabilities of other people. It's just Isaiah. There's a failure to listen and see, and those in that reading, those who are blind and deaf apparently fail to understand how to act. It's yeah, and I can understand why people would be put off even by following and wanting to even read Scripture because of these readings that we read. Yeah.
Is it all negative, Mark?
I think I actually really do agree with Vanessa. If you read and you take that at its face value, you would see quite a lot of negativity. You would see people being punished for the wickednesses of their forefathers, for their own sin. If you read it like that, and you can read it like that, and if, I guess, to the untrained, not the untrained, but the kind of someone who isn't aware of other ways of interpreting, of other ways of hermeneutics, I think, yeah, you can. And I know when I do, I certainly read certain passages, and most of the ones that Vanessa's just read, and they stick in my throat. It kind of hurts. I just think, especially that, I think you mentioned as a priest that I shouldn't be going anywhere near the altar. Absolutely right. Which is interesting, though, because one of my massive God moments is actually when I am at the altar, and when I the most holiest of it. I tell this to everybody. The first time I celebrated Holy Communion as the celebrant, and I lifted up the host in adoration, that moment of holiness that's central to the whole Eucharistic service, then my stoma decided to make a massive noise, a really big, well, I'm just going to say, excuse my language, a big fart sound. There's no other way of going around it, but it was. And it was awful. It was really embarrassing. But at the same time, it was a moment where God spoke to me and said, yeah, I've called you for who you are. So that actually really contradicts that kind of moment in the Bible where I'm told that I shouldn't be even approaching the altar, let alone serving it. And I think people historically have used Scripture to belittle, unequal, to misinform how we think about disabilities. But thankfully, there is now a massive movement to change that, and to reread some of these texts in light of liberation theology, but to reread these texts for other situations. Now, that's not just reading us into reading what we want into those texts, those historical texts. This is about, actually, let's just take away those layers of stuff that other people have put on, shove that out the window, and let's deal with those texts as they are and see how they read to us. So, and I think we'll go on to those in a little bit later on. When you look at them again in light of disability theology, I'm not too sure that it is as discriminatory as we initially thought.
I think also a lot of it came down from the Greco-Roman kind of influences of the purity of sacrifices, and so which is why we had to have the young lambs, we had to have the purest of animals, didn't we, to be sacrificed on the altar. And actually, what we need to be thinking about is we're all made in God's image. And this is about the Imago Dei, and we're all made in God's image. And what is that? What does that mean? So if we're thinking about how do we perceive God's image to be, and how does then that reflect on us, because we are all fearfully and wonderfully made in God's image. So I think we have that as a starting point. Then we can then start unpicking what that means in terms of our theology and the liberation that comes from that.
Should we move on to talking a bit about that liberation and that maybe that releasing of some of these texts that are a bit difficult to grapple with, and look at what the Bible says, kind of both about liberating us from some of those views, but also about healing and some of that redemption, because there is that arc of redemption, isn't there, in our Bible, both in the Old and New Testament, that full arc of God, and there is redemption there and there is healing there. But yeah, what does that look like for either of you, or for Ashley either? What does that look like biblically for you as well?
Sorry, you have to say that again, because I think I might have missed the end of that question.
What does, if we take the look at liberation and liberating, what does healing in the Bible look like? What does liberation from those negative views look like for us? And what does the Bible say about healing and redemption and those good things in the Christian journey that we can look at and see as being positive?
I think for me, there was something I read once that completely changed my entire, when I was still I always call myself a baby Christian. When I was a baby Christian, and I was 18 when I was a baby Christian, something that actually helped me on that faith journey was seeing Jesus, when he'd been raised from the dead, wasn't physically healed. He still had his wounds. And that was a massive thing for me in my journey. Personally, I don't know if that resonates at all with you guys, but yeah, that was it helped me come to terms with who I am and accepting that I come with all those scars.
And I think that is really what liberation theology is saying to us, because if you've ever seen this book, so I love Nancy Eisland's work. I just love it. It's and she kind of but she has this image of Jesus on the cross. He's absolutely he's nailed there. He can't move. And then what happens? You know, he rises from the dead, and you know, it's this whole liberation. It's an amazing image, and I think that Nancy Eisland talks about this a lot. She suggests this that whilst having a disability implies a punishment for our sins sometimes in the Bible, it also actually is considered an impairment of God's image. And so and that in turn then prevents those with disabilities from seeking even leadership positions in our churches because they don't feel they're able to.
Yeah.
But if you've got this image then of this the liberation that comes from the Christ crucified, then that then will lead people forwards to think, yeah, okay, we can do this. I am made in the image of God. And we can do this.
And that is such a powerful message, isn't it, there?
Yeah.
It's such a powerful image, actually.
I read Nancy when I was at university, and it kind of changed everything for me, especially the idea of dyslexia at that time. And then later on, I revisited the idea of a disabled God a little bit when things changed for me personally. But so she helped me through that, and that book, that's a fabulous read. If anyone gets a chance, it's good text. But I think some of the things that you both mentioned there, I'm probably going to come back to. But I think what the Bible does is helps us to, and certainly the idea of Christ crucified, God divine on the cross. It kind of makes us realize that what we understand are human assumptions about fixing the broken bodies and making things normal. And actually, it's beyond all of that with God. And I don't know whether we can comprehend it. So when we look at some of the texts in the Bible, I think we kind of put our human thoughts on it. And I'm not sure that's where God is. So, for instance, Moses was massive for me, the story of Moses. And he kind of turned around, didn't he, and just said, no, I'm sorry, I can't do all that. And I read it as, oh, I'm dyslexic, I can't do that. I've got this stutter, that kind of, I can't lead your people. That's not my calling. Now, God didn't try and heal him. God didn't, he just said, get on with the job, basically. And I think some of the things that I wanted to pick up from both things that Ashley said was this idea, this difference between healing and cure. I think you were thinking about this idea of healing, or was it cure? And I think there is a difference, and I think God, that we can get two different things when we reread texts. Or maybe I should come on to that later on. I don't know.
I think that the matter of disability liberation theology fits with the social model, doesn't it, that we've been talking about, because it works collaboratively with it, because with all these principles of human rights and dignity and respect that comes with that freedom of and that sort of empowerment idea.
I think that's really different, isn't it? That is in itself a sense of healing, but it's not necessarily a cured thing. And when I think often about the Bible and kind of this kind of story, I always come to 2 Corinthians 12, and that Paul saying, God's grace is sufficient enough for him. But actually, he goes to God, doesn't he, and asks for healing, and God doesn't. We don't know what healing for, but God doesn't heal. But actually, in that, he acknowledges that God's grace is sufficient, and it's through his weakness that he is able to minister to others. And that's there in the Bible. Yet often in our churches we don't see it, because we see these people who are very able-bodied and seem to, from the front, look like this perfect image, and it's hard to look at them and say, can I do that? Can I make it up the chancel steps if I can't walk? Those kind of questions are really powerful. And yet when we look at the Bible, we see that there are these leaders who God raised up and equipped and enabled, and left us, and enabled them because of who they were. Because there were these people that that God chose to use because their hearts were in the right place. Their hearts were pure.
Yes, but there are also some very positive images of disabled people in Scripture as well. So in Genesis 1:27, we're all made in God's image. We've already talked about that. In Job, God served as eyes for the blind and feet for the lame, being an advocate. He was actually an advocate, advocating for those with disabilities. Samuel 16, the Lord doesn't judge by appearance. And 2 Samuel 9, there is a place at the king's table for I can't even never say this word. It's Mephibosheth, isn't it? The disabled son of Jonathan. And the grandson of Saul he was. And in Psalm 139:4, God's essence is within the creation of every person, for we're all fearfully, wonderfully made. And Luke 14, those with disabilities were invited to the banquet, for God's kingdom is not complete without them.
I think that's the thing as a community, as a Christian society, is we're quick to jump to that healing. And I don't know if that's something to do with us, in that we want to be doing something. And so if we jump to healing and fixating on that, means that we're doing something, we're working towards something, as if we need an end goal. And God is saying that it doesn't need...
The only healing that I see though in the Bible is there's only one type, and that is healing with our relationship with God. That's the only type of healing that God or that Jesus offers. Yeah. He wants us to be healed, to be part of his family again. Yeah. And I think maybe what we're trying to do is the other thing that Jesus himself does do, but for a different reason than I think we think, is we're trying to cure people. Yeah. And that's not our remit. That's not where we're to come in here at all. And I think there is a difference between curing people and healing. God is trying to heal all of us, and that healing story is right through the Bible. That this healing, the cure, is what we sometimes fixate on. And when people go up for prayer, I wonder who's actually thinking they're going for healing, who thinks they're going for cure, and from the person offering the prayer, are they correctly praying for healing, or are they trying to cure the person in front of them? And I think there's that difference, and it's important to make that distinction. I don't know what you think about that.
That's really helpful to me, because I think it's really easy. It helps make that distinction between what the two mean.
Mm. I also think that if we look at the Christology and we interpret the healing narratives from the position of the social model, which I guess is what we're saying, isn't it? That they serve to evidence that Christ is trying to change attitudes, which is what we started with here, didn't we? About this is a lot about people's attitudes, and certainly I think the inclusion is at the heart of Jesus' ministry, which doesn't necessarily mean making disabled people non-disabled, because for in the Gospels, Jesus' ministry is restorative, both to family and community and to God.
Ask some disabled people whether they want to be cured, whether they want to be normalized, whether we want to be changed in this world or the next. And it's a completely different bag. So if somebody offered me something else, I think I'd probably take it. But that wasn't the case at one point. I was like, oh, this is me. This is who I am. And that's slightly changed. But you put me next to the next person and the next person, and they're all going to come up with different answers. In fact, I'm probably going to be receiving hate mail now for even suggesting that I would quite happily be, but they don't know what I'm going through, and I'm happy to get rid of that at a moment's notice. So it kind of, I think healing is important, but we can't assume that that's what people want.
Yeah, absolutely.
And a cure, we can't assume that that's what people want. For some people, that's part of their their God-given talents, their God-given gifts, and how God calls them. And sometimes I'm convinced that for me, this is part of who God has called me to be, with a stoma right now that makes a very big noise. Why? Because it's made me have conversations with people that I wouldn't have had before. And through my poor health and everything that's gone on before that as well, which is slightly different. But again, God's used those moments. So I don't know.
I think that's really helpful, and it kind of moves us into the final question, because there's such distinction between each individual and different approaches that I wonder, if disability is an inevitable part of the human condition, then disability is also going to be a part of our churches. It's going to be inevitably part of our church communities. I wonder what we can do to support those within our communities on their faith journeys, actually. What can we do? Not just Ashley's training to be a vicar, and the three of us are all ordained, but not just us as church leaders. How can we in the pews help others in our communities on their faith journeys? What are helpful things to do to enable others to be included, to see that Christological vision of the kingdom of God be inclusive to all?
This is about valuing and belonging, isn't it? Feeling valued. We are valued and belonging. And I think the church is called to be a place where people are. This is what Christ is teaching us, that everybody is valued and they belong. And I think that whilst, I think it was John Swinton, he said, whilst human rights are vital and guarantee inclusion for all people with disabilities, they don't guarantee belonging. So again, this is about the attitude, isn't it? So I think we need to be encouraging people for opportunity for full participation in the ways that work for them. And so, when I'm doing my accessibility audits now, I give them notice and I say, right, I want you to please bring people with you, and we'll go around the church together, and they can share with the things that they find difficult, the things they would like to do, and then we can talk about how we might enable that to happen. So having conversations is really important. You can talk, from the pulpit about, please, we want to be listening to you. We want to have a conversation with you. If there's any way that we can be working together, because we want to enable others, everybody to feel that they're fully welcome and participating as much as they want to do, is to have the conversation, have an interpreter to have them, and enable those conversations in the way that people can have those conversations. And that might be through needing to use different language, it might be through use pictures, it might be through having going around the church together and just talking and listening, I think. Providing accessible materials, and you've got the course, actually, haven't you, Joshua? Have you still got the course?
I have. I'm going to send it to you. I have got the course here.
The Enabling Church course.
Lots of COVID in my.
We did it years ago.
Yeah, I do.
There's lots in there about it. And one of the other things that I think it was, who said this? I think it was John Swinton again. He said worship could become a little bit chaotic and a little bit, because you're going to try to enable all people with everyone. And so it might seem messy, if you like to call it, but actually that's fabulous. And I remember when Archdeacon Ian came to our celebration of different abilities service in the cathedral a few years ago, he said that, didn't he, Mark? Ian said, this is one of the most chaotic services I've ever been to, but he just loved it because everybody was participating. They were truly worshipping in the way that they felt able to do, and it was just fab.
You mentioned a lot of things there, Vanessa, which was amazing. I think one of the things that might be helpful for people, especially within Chester Diocese, where you work, is to know how to contact you about kind of some of those ideas, but also about maybe especially the audits that you offer churches. So maybe if you could talk a little bit more about the audits and how people contact you, that would be really helpful.
Yeah. Okay. You can contact me through going on the diocesan website, but it's vanessa.layfield@chester.anglican.org. And you can email me or ask somebody else to help you to email me. You can. There's a telephone number as well that they can phone me on. So it is 07984 3188885. So they can phone me on that if they would like me to do that. But there's a fabulous book, Widening the Eye of the Needle. And if anybody wants to do anything with DAC or anything, this. I mean, it has absolutely everything in here, even down to how you can, your building and things like that you need to do. But there's a very simple form on the website which has the accessibility audit on it as a very quick one to do. And it's not just about ramps. And, I've heard so many people say, well, we don't need a ramp because we don't have any wheelchair users. I mean, for goodness sake, you might get the wheelchair users if you have a ramp. But But it covers lots of things: the worship space, the hearing loop, the signage, the fonts, and even simple things that we wouldn't even think of. If you're speaking from the lectern, make sure that people can see your lips. Yeah. Because those that are lip reading need to be able to see. Shadows, lighting. People don't generally think about these things, do they? But yes, so you can get these information on the websites and the book, and I'm happy to come out. But please involve your congregations in doing the audits with you. That's really important if you can.
I think just to pick up on that last point of Vanessa's there, get the congregation to do the audits with you. I think the key to all of this, no matter whether you're a church leader or whether you're going into a church for the very first time, is actually to build relationships and to have conversations. Yeah. And you will, if you go up to your vicar or priest or minister or whoever, they are trained in how to listen. So you can tell them stuff and they will listen. That's their job. It's what they are or not paid for, but that's their job. So don't feel embarrassed about talking about what is it that can make this space more accessible for you.
Yep.
Because as Vanessa said, it's not just about ramps and loop systems, but actually they're really important because, quite rightly, if we have them in place, then people might think, oh, great, the church is opening its arms to me. Please let me go. But there's other things as well, for the neurodivergent to think about overstimulating and all that kind of stuff. But you need to tell people, because you can put two dyslexics in a row and we will be different. You can put, and we're all going to be different. So you need to talk. That would be the top tip.
I remember when I was curious, there was a lady on our street who didn't seem to show any interest in coming to church. And we held a street party and I got chatting to her. And I found out that she used to come to church. So I said, oh, I'd love to come on and have a cup of tea. And she said, oh, could you bring me home communion? And I said, of course, I'd love to. And I took home communion to her and I started chatting to her. And when we got down to the reason she couldn't come to church, it was she couldn't find anywhere to sit comfortably. That actually the pews we had, she couldn't sit on. because they were too uncomfortable for her, and because of the way her body was, that she couldn't sit for that length of time. But unless the conversation, no one in church knew about that. She just disappeared through the door, and we'd not seen her, and not seen her for 10, 15 years. So, yeah, having conversations is a really good place to start.
I think that is key. But then also, some people don't want to. If there's no other chair available to sit in, they don't want to be able to say, actually, can I have another chair, please? A different kind of chair, or do they? So about thinking about those things beforehand, so that maybe there is a chair available that has arms that they might struggle to be lifting themselves up or something. So having an armchair there, a couple of armchairs there, might sort of avoid that situation, because some people are afraid to talk, aren't they? They don't want to. So it's being mindful of that as well. It's difficult, but definitely communication. I agree is the key. Is the key to this. Yeah.
I think to pick up on something that Vanessa just said was, some people don't even know what they need either. They might not realise what is the problem, and might need someone to help them work out what that actually is. We had a lady in church who had dementia, and she had no clue, I don't think, what her needs were at that time. And I think it was up to us to help not only her, but those who were struggling with parts of her symptoms from the dementia, on how we could, as a church, support her.
Yeah. And that's where talking to family members as well comes into that. Talking to the carers comes into that too, doesn't it? Those people that know people with dementia, well enough to be able to say and be their advocates. I think it's important.
Our joy, though, isn't that our pleasure to welcome people on Christ's behalf? Isn't that to go that kind of extra mile and to find out and to do that? And isn't that the joy of ministry as well? It's fabulous.
That's kind of inviting people to the heavenly banquet, isn't it, really? I'm trying to work
Absolutely.
out.
And do you know what? If it means an extra chair for someone, or put one up.
Yeah, or if it means moving the altar down a level, absolutely, I think, That's so helpful. Thank you.
Can we put a plug in for our online disability service coming up, haven't we, Mark?
Of course you can. We have
an online disability service that Mark's working really hard on, and we've got lots of people coming on, but it's all going to be pre-recorded this year. So hopefully it'll be online on the 12th of September. Disability Awareness Day was moved from July to September because of COVID. We would have held a service in the church. I think we were going, which church was it? We were going over to Stockport somewhere, I think, like this time, was it? But it's going to be online this time, and then next year, hopefully, we'll be able to have the service in a church again, or cathedral or something.
Chester Diocese, we celebrate difference, and you're all welcome.
Yeah.
So
all welcome.
There you go.
Will that be on the Chester Diocese website for people to watch?
Yes, it is. Yeah, 12th of September.
Great. I'll send people, I'll plug it within the parish, but also people now hopefully can watch it. Do you have any? Thank you so much for your time this evening. Do you have any last words of wisdom that you would like to impart? Maybe not all words of experience.
I think it is about being able to encourage people to worship in ways that work for them, and trying to communication with
Thank you so much.
I think that we've got to extend out. That's what we need to do as Christians, and be there enable people to come through our doors. Mark's he's our vice chair, but he didn't for the Disability Forum, and he didn't own up to that. Did you, Mark?
No. So my final piece of wisdom and piece of advice, if you are watching down the end of this TV screen, just know this: God loves you with all your broken bits, with all the bits that don't quite work, with all the bits that have fallen off, and with all the bits that make you laugh and smile and cry. God loves all those bits, and you're welcome in church. And when the church gets it wrong, forgive us, and we'll try better next time.
Yeah.
That is an amazing point to end. I don't think we can say it better than that. So thank you both for this amazing conversation and the chance to share with us.
Thank you.
Well, that was a wonderful conversation, wasn't it?
It really was. It was really useful as well.
I love the fact that both Vanessa and Mark can talk so passionately and with so much knowledge about those kind of this area. Really, I learned so much just from listening to them, being part of the conversation. I mean, for me, I think that is a really key point. It's actually listening to others, enabling them to come into the conversation. I love the fact Vanessa talked about using different ways to do that, whether it be speaking, whether it be using interpreters or pictures, to actually bring people into the conversation with us, to not set our views, but actually to listen to how other people have experienced and what church is like for them, and to be bold enough to ask the questions and be willing to listen and hear, even if the feedback's a bit difficult. That'll stay with me, I think, for a while and really challenge me in my ministry.
Yeah, and being ready to do something about what you hear as well, if it's possible. Yeah. I think for me, the most interesting bit was that distinction between healing and cure, and how there is a big distinction between the two, and what that means, and what that can mean for us in our ministry. Yeah,
we so readily jump to the idea of curing, don't we? And I think the language we use there is just it's quite a fine line, but if you can get it right, actually, I think it's really helpful for people.
Yeah, it's a real nuance, isn't it? And really easy for healing to slip into that curing, whereas that healing is about your relationship with God.
Yeah, definitely. So what's up next for our podcast, Ashley? We're not quite finished with this series, are we?
No, we've got one more episode after this, I think.
Yeah, we have, and we've got another guest, the Dr. Gillian Strain, who is the head of St. Raphael Healing Ministries, based in London, and she has such a fascinating story of both healing in her personal life, but also the experience she brings from her work. I think she's going to talk about Go Healthy Community or Go Healing Communities on the podcast with us next time. So where can people find that podcast when it's ready?
That podcast will be on most streaming platforms. It should be on Spotify, on Apple Podcasts, on Google Podcasts. And they should also be able to find it on our website.
Yeah.
But if anyone doesn't have access to any of those, they can email at us at journeyingfaithfully@gmail.com, and we will be able to send that out to them.
Yeah, and we'll put it on YouTube as well, so we'll hopefully film the conversation.
Oh yeah, YouTube as well.
YouTube as well, people to listen to. And they can use that email address really to contact us about anything. So if they've got ideas or they want to say hello, they can contact us and say hello whenever they want, can't they? So that's
definitely.
Journeying Faith.
And we also have a Facebook page as well.
We do, which we probably post on more.
Yeah, it's at Journeying Faithfully on Facebook, and being able to hear from other people's stories is really important to us, and we love to hear from you. Yeah. So if you want to drop us an email or message on Facebook, yeah, we'd love to hear from you.
Yeah, we'd love to hear what was really important to you from this episode actually as well. So we'd love to hear, your experiences of disability in the church and kind of what's important to you in this conversation. And these podcasts are meant to be conversations that you can get involved with. So please do talk to us about it if you see us in person, or talk to us online as well.
Definitely.
Thank you all for watching, and we will see you soon.
See you soon.